At Christmas dinner, my sister answered the door, gave me an eye roll, and sneered. "You're not wanted here. Go wreck somebody else's holiday." I peeked inside and saw the whole family laughing around the table. So I just said, "All right then." 10 minutes later, my dad stormed in, shouting my name. The sound of the lock clicking into place, severing me from my family on Christmas Day, echoed louder than any joyful carol. My sister's eyes, usually sharp with veiled contempt, held a glint of pure satisfaction as the heavy oak door thudded shut. The cold December air, sharp and unforgiving, bit at my face, a stark contrast to the deceptive warmth I'd seen through the frosted glass. My fingers, numb even through my gloves, still clutched the casserole dish, a dish that represented 3 hours of meticulous effort, hours I'd spent trying to earn a place I knew, deep down, I'd lost. Through the window, the glow of twinkling Christmas lights mocked me, framing a scene of muffled laughter and familial comfort. My finger had hovered over the doorbell for what felt like an eternity, a silent prayer escaping my lips before I finally pressed it. Footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate. The door swung open, revealing Miranda, my older sister by 3 years, draped in a red cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Her gaze, that familiar cutting sweep of disdain, moved over me like a surgeon's scalpel. "We don't want you here," she'd snarled, her voice thick with a venom she'd perfected over years. "Go ruin someone else's holiday." I tried to peer past her shoulder, catching a glimpse of the living room, the archway leading to the dining room. There they were, the entire tableau of our family Christmas mom, sitting at the table, dishing out food, laughing at something Uncle Preston had said, Dad poised to carve the turkey with theatrical flair, Aunt Sylvia meticulously arranging napkins. Even Grandma Edith, who usually napped through half of Christmas dinner, seemed animated, her small frame bustling with joyful directions. They hadn't noticed me. Or perhaps they had, and simply didn't care. "Got it." I managed the words barely a whisper against the rising lump in my throat. Miranda's lips curled a small triumphant smile before the door swung shut, the metallic click of the lock a final, deafening punctuation mark. I stood there, the casserole dish growing heavy, still warm in my frozen hands, a hollow ache in my chest. How had I become the family pariah? This wasn't just a moment of rejection, it was the brutal culmination of years of family scapegoating. In such dynamics, one family member is unfairly blamed for the family's problems, serving as an emotional outlet for underlying dysfunctions. It allows others to avoid confronting their own issues, solidifying a false narrative that's easier to accept than uncomfortable truths. But the story of how I reached that desolate porch, exiled from my own kin, began years before, with a secret that threatened to unravel us all. It had been nearly 3 years since everything changed. 3 years ago, I was the heart of our Christmases, the one who remembered every birthday, organized every reunion, the first call for advice. Then, I made the colossal mistake of telling the truth. I trudged back to my car, the biting wind feeling like a personal affront, and gently placed the casserole on the passenger seat. The engine coughed reluctantly to life, a sad echo of my own spirit, and I cranked the heat, desperate for any shred of warmth. My phone buzzed, a small vibration against my numb thigh. It was Garrett, the guy I'd been seeing for a few months. "How's it going?" he'd texted. I just didn't have the energy to respond. The words felt too heavy, the lie too exhausting. Instead, I drove to the little coffee shop 3 blocks away, the one that always stayed open on Christmas. The owner, a kind Jewish man, figured he might as well make money on a holiday he didn't celebrate, and I silently thanked him for his pragmatism. I ordered a black coffee, the bitter taste a perfect match for my mood, and retreated to a corner booth, staring blankly at my phone. 10 minutes had barely passed since Miranda slammed that door when my phone vibrated violently, Dad's name flashing across the screen. My first instinct was to ignore it, to let the silence swallow me whole, but something, a flicker of hope, or perhaps just a desperate need for answers, made me swipe to accept. "Vivian," his voice, raw with urgency, was so loud I had to yank the phone away from my ear. "Where are you? At a coffee shop?" I mumbled, confusion beginning to prick through my numbness. "Why?" "Get back here right now. Right this instant." "Dad," I pleaded, "Miranda made it pretty clear I'm not welcome." "I don't care what Miranda said. Get back here now." The line went dead. I stared at the dark screen, my mind reeling. This felt like a trap, a twisted game I didn't understand. Yet the sheer panic in his voice had been undeniably real. Against every fiber of my being, I left money on the table, a silent apology to the owner for my abrupt departure, and drove back. What awaited me at the house wasn't forgiveness, but a family in disarray, poised on the precipice of a much darker revelation. As I pulled up, Dad was already on the porch, coatless in the biting cold, his face a furious crimson I'd never seen before. The front door stood wide open behind him, and the strained, raised voices from inside spilled out into the quiet street. "Get in here!" He barked the moment I stepped out of the car, his command shattering the last vestiges of my holiday spirit. I followed him, my legs feeling like lead, into a house transformed. The cheerful atmosphere from barely 15 minutes ago had completely evaporated. Mom sat slumped at the dining table, her head buried in her hands. Aunt Sylvia looked utterly uncomfortable, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips, a silent testament to the abruptly halted festivities. Uncle Preston was hunched over his phone, scrolling with a grim, almost conspiratorial expression. Grandma Edith, usually the picture of serene wisdom, had her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. Miranda stood by the fireplace, arms defensively crossed, a storm brewing in her eyes. And Quentin, her husband, looked like he was actively trying to melt into the couch cushions, hoping to escape detection. "Someone want to tell me what's happening?" I asked, my voice barely steady, the silence pressing in around me. Dad turned to face the room, his gaze sweeping over each of them before settling on Mom. "Claudia, show her." Mom slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were swollen and red, whether from anger or tears, I couldn't tell. Without a word, she picked up her phone from the table and handed it to me. On the screen was an email. My stomach dropped as I recognized the sender, Kenneth Lawson, the attorney who'd been handling Grandma Dorothy's estate since she passed 2 years ago. My maternal grandmother, Dorothy, had been the family matriarch, the one who'd built a successful chain of bakeries from nothing and invested her wealth wisely. The family's quick shift in demeanor, particularly Mom's tears and Dad's anger, illustrates the immediate and chaotic emotional impact of crisis-induced transparency. When a long-hidden truth finally explodes, it shatters denial, forcing individuals to confront realities they've actively avoided, often leading to a torrent of previously suppressed emotions and reactive behaviors. The words on that screen, deceptively simple in their formatting, would prove to be nothing short of devastating, revealing a betrayal that ran deeper than I could have ever imagined. The email was direct, stark, and utterly devastating. "Dear Mrs. Raymond Hartley," it began. "As per your mother Dorothy's wishes, I am required to inform you that the distribution of her estate, which was initially scheduled to occur on Christmas Day 2024, has been delayed pending investigation into allegations of elder financial abuse. According to documents provided by your daughter, Vivian, there are questions regarding significant withdrawals from Mrs. Dorothy's accounts in the final year of her life. Until this matter is resolved, all assets remain frozen. Sincerely, Kenneth Lawson, Esquire." My hand started shaking so violently I almost dropped the phone. I looked up, and every single eye in the room was fixed on me, a mixture of disbelief, anger. "You did this," Miranda hissed, her voice a raw, ugly sound, spitting the words like poison. "You vindictive, jealous bitch!" "Miranda!" Grandma Edith's voice cracked like a whip, silencing her instantly. "Watch your mouth in my presence." But Miranda, fueled by a desperate rage, ignored her. "I know what she did." "What I want to know," Grandma Edith interrupted, her gaze unwavering, "is why she felt she had to do it." I carefully, almost reverently, set Mom's phone back on the table. My throat felt impossibly tight, raw and constricted, but I forced the words out anyway, a quiet declaration against the suffocating silence. "Because Miranda stole from Grandma Dorothy." "That's a lie." Miranda's face had gone blotchy, a furious, mottled red spreading across her cheeks. "I helped her. I took care of her finances because she was getting confused. And you withdrew $47,000 from her checking account over the course of 8 months?" I stated, my voice steadier than I felt, a small miracle of calm amidst the storm. "You used her credit cards to pay for your kitchen renovation." You convinced her to change her will to leave you the bakery building in Portland, Oregon, even though she'd always said she was going to sell it and split the proceeds equally among all of us. You weren't helping her manage her money, you were transferring it into your own accounts. Miranda's mouth opened and closed, words failing her. Quentin, beside her, had gone very, very pale. Is this true, Miranda? Dad's voice, quiet now, cut through the air with a chilling sharpness. She needed help. Miranda stammered, desperation creeping into her tone. She was forgetting things, getting confused about bills. I was protecting her money from scammers. And you were stealing from your own grandmother. I finished, my gaze locked on hers. And when I tried to talk to you about it, when I showed you the bank statements I'd found while helping Grandma organize her paperwork, you told me I was being paranoid and jealous of your relationship with her. The room had gone utterly silent, the only sound the rhythmic, almost judgmental, ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. You went to the rest of the family. I continued, my eyes moving to Mom and Dad, then to Uncle Preston and Aunt Sylvia. You told them I was causing drama, that I was trying to turn everyone against you because I'd always been envious. You said I was having a mental breakdown. You convinced them to exclude me from family events because my toxic behavior was upsetting Grandma Dorothy. Mom's face crumpled, tears starting anew. Vivian, I tried to tell you, I said, fighting to keep my voice level, the old pain resurfacing. I tried to show you the evidence, but you chose to believe her instead. You all did. It was a bitter vindication, but the truth, once unleashed, has a way of exposing not just the perpetrator, but the complicity of silence. Uncle Preston cleared his throat, a small, nervous sound. To be fair, Miranda did say you'd been acting erratically at work, that you'd been fired for. I quit my job at Harrison Enterprises because my boss was sexually harassing me. I interrupted, the words bursting out. I reported it to HR, and when they did nothing, I left. Miranda knew that! She knew exactly what happened, and she still told everyone I'd been fired for poor performance. Aunt Sylvia made a small, pained sound, clutching her wine glass. After Grandma died, I went to her attorney with the documents I'd collected. I explained, the exhaustion weighing heavily on my voice. Bank statements, credit card bills, the original copy of her will from 2019 versus the one she signed 6 months before her death. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was trying to protect what Grandma Dorothy actually wanted. Which was what? Dad asked quietly, his voice hollow. For her estate to be divided equally among her 4 children and 6 grandchildren, I said. For the bakery building to be sold and the money split fairly. For nobody to get special treatment because she loved us all the same. Miranda had started openly crying now, mascara streaking down her cheeks in dark, messy rivulets. I took care of her. I visited her every week. I drove her to doctor's appointments. Where were the rest of you? You visited her every week after you got her to add you as a joint account holder. I counted, the years of unspoken resentment finally spilling over. Before that, you saw her once a month if she was lucky, and you know who actually drove her to most of her doctor's appointments? Me, while you were taking client calls and rescheduling because you were too busy. Quentin, who had been statuesque in his mortification, finally spoke up, his voice barely a whisper. Maybe we should go. No, Dad said firmly, his gaze fixed on Miranda. You stay right there. He turned to his eldest daughter, and I saw something in his expression I'd never seen before when he looked at her, a disappointment so profound it seemed to age him 10 years in an instant. How much did you take? He asked, the words heavy with resignation. Miranda's tears came harder now, a choked sob escaping her lips. I didn't mean to. It just happened gradually, and I kept thinking I'd pay it back. 63,000, Quentin said quietly, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the room. Maybe a little more. We used some of it for the house, some for the kids' private school tuition, some for... He trailed helpless. The number hung in the air, a noxious cloud. Jesus Christ, Miranda? Uncle Preston muttered, shaking his head. Grandma Edith, moving with a surprising, deliberate grace, slowly stood up, using her cane for support. She walked over to where I stood and took my hand. Her skin was paper, thin and spotted with age, but her grip was surprisingly strong. You were right to report this, she said, her voice clear and firm. Dorothy was my sister. I know exactly what she would have wanted, and it wasn't for one grandchild to rob her blind while she was dying. Miranda flinched, as if physically struck. Mom, please? My mother started, her voice thick with anguish, but Grandma Edith shook her head. Claudia, you raised one daughter who did the right thing even when it cost her everything, and another who stole from her dying grandmother. I know which one Dorothy would be proud of. Mom's face crumpled completely, and she started sobbing into her hands. Dad moved to comfort her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, but his eyes remained on me, a question etched in their depths. How long? He asked, his voice barely audible. How long have we been shutting you out? Nearly 3 years? I said, the weight of the past pressing down on me. Since 2 months after Grandma's funeral, when Miranda convinced you all that I was the problem. I shrugged, a wary gesture. You came here tonight anyway. It's Christmas. I thought maybe. I don't know what I thought. Aunt Sylvia, moving with newfound purpose, got up and walked over to me. Without a word, she pulled me into a tight, unexpected hug. I'm so sorry, she whispered against my hair, her voice trembling. I should have listened. I should have asked more questions. Uncle Preston was next, his apology awkward but undeniably genuine. Even Grandma Edith, my unlikely defender, apologized for not being more involved, for assuming the younger generation could work things out among themselves. Miranda stood by the fireplace, isolated, her public disgrace a tangible thing in the room. Quentin, beside her, looked utterly miserable. What happens now? Mom asked, finally, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. The estate is frozen until the investigation concludes. I explained, my voice flat. Kenneth said it could take months. They'll want to interview everyone, go through all of Grandma's financial records, probably depose Miranda formally. Can she go to jail for this? Quentin asked, his voice barely above a whisper, fear etched on his face. Possibly, I said. Elder financial abuse is a felony in this state. If the DA decides to prosecute, I left the sentence unfinished, the unspoken threat hanging heavy in the air. Miranda sank down onto the fireplace hearth, her face buried in her hands, her body racked with sobs. Part of me, a small, vindictive part, felt a cold satisfaction watching her break down, but mostly I just felt utterly bone-deep tired. This collective awakening within the family highlights a phenomenon known as enabling behavior and the eventual collapse of a codependent family system. For years, the family implicitly or explicitly enabled Miranda's deceit by accepting her narrative and ostracizing me, prioritizing superficial peace over challenging a favored child's destructive actions. The truth, when it finally emerged, shattered this fragile equilibrium, forcing a painful re-evaluation of loyalties and responsibilities. But amidst the wreckage of a shattered Christmas, a surprising and long overdue reckoning was just beginning. Why didn't you come to me directly? Dad asked, his voice filled with regret, before going to the attorney. I did. I reminded him gently, the irony not lost on me. 3 years ago, you told me I was being ridiculous and that I needed to apologize to Miranda for making accusations. His face fell, the memory clearly resurfacing. I remember. God, I remember. And I didn't listen. None of us did, Mom said, her voice thick with tears, her gaze meeting mine. Miranda was so convincing. She said you'd been struggling, that you were lashing out, that this was a cry for help. And it was easier to believe her than to believe your daughter could be a thief. I finished for her, the words devoid of anger now, just a profound exhaustion. The turkey, half carved and cooling, sat neglected in the middle of the table. The festive candles had burned down to waxy nubs. Christmas music, incongruously cheerful, still played softly from the speaker in the corner, a dissonant soundtrack to the heavy silence in the room. I should go, I said, ready to escape. No. Dad's voice was firm, resolute. You should stay. This is your home. This is your family. Miranda is the one who needs to leave. Miranda's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock and fury. You're kicking me out. Yes, Dad said, his voice cold, devoid of the earlier affection. You stole from your grandmother. You lied about your sister. You destroyed this family's trust. So yes, you need to leave. Raymond, Mom started, a fresh wave of tears in her voice, but Dad shook his head, his jaw set. I'm not negotiating this, Claudia. Quentin slowly stood up, reaching a hand to help a stunned Miranda to her feet. She looked at me then, her gaze a potent mix of hatred and desperation. I hope you're happy, she snarled, her voice raw. You've destroyed everything. No, Grandma Edith said sharply, her ancient voice cutting through the tension. You did that yourself, girl. You stole, you lied, and you turned your family against someone who was trying to protect an old woman who couldn't protect herself. You have no one to blame but yourself. They left without another word, the door closing softly behind them this time, leaving an unnatural quiet in their wake. The house, though still full of people, suddenly felt vast and empty. I ended up staying for dinner after all. We reheated the turkey, the warmth a small comfort against the lingering chill. Aunt Sylvia microwaved my casserole, and everyone made a point of complimenting it, their praise a fragile bridge in the strained atmosphere. Conversation was stilted at first, punctuated by awkward silences and careful, almost forced topic changes. But gradually, tentatively, things thawed. Uncle Preston, surprisingly, told a humorous story about his new job at the architecture firm. Aunt Sylvia, her usual bubbly self slowly returning, talked about her daughter's upcoming wedding. Grandma Edith, ever the character, complained about her physical therapist with the kind of creative insults that made everyone laugh despite themselves. A welcome, genuine sound. Around 9 o'clock, after the dishes had been washed and the leftovers packed away, Dad pulled me aside into his study. The room smelled of old books and pipe tobacco, a familiar comfort, even though he'd quit smoking 15 years ago. I need to apologize properly, he said, his voice raspy with emotion. Not just for tonight, but for 3 years of failing you. Dad, it's... Let me finish, he interrupted gently, sinking heavily into his worn leather chair. When you first came to us with your concerns about Miranda, I dismissed them. I thought you were overreacting, seeing problems where there weren't any. Your mother and I, we've always known you two had a complicated relationship. That's putting it mildly. I chuckled, a small, wary sound. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Miranda has always been competitive with you. Even when you were kids, you were the one who got better grades, who made friends more easily, who seemed to just glide through life while she had to work for everything. I think she resented you for it. So, she stole from Grandma and framed me as crazy. I'm not making excuses for her, Dad said quickly, his expression serious. What she did was inexcusable. I'm trying to explain how we got here, how I failed to see what was right in front of me. He rubbed his eyes tiredly. When she came to us with concerns about your mental health, about you supposedly losing your job and acting erratically, it fit a narrative I'd already constructed in my head. You'd always been the responsible one, the one who had everything together. Maybe you were cracking under the pressure. Maybe you were lashing out at Miranda because you were struggling. Instead of asking me directly, I finished for him, the pain still fresh. Instead of asking you directly, he agreed, his voice heavy with self-reproach. And for that, I am profoundly sorry. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of years hanging between us. Outside, snow had started falling, fat, lazy flakes drifting past the window like something from a perfect greeting card, a stark contrast to the imperfections inside. Kenneth Lawson called me last week. I admitted, breaking the silence. He said the investigation was nearly complete and that he was obligated to inform the family before Christmas. I could have asked him to wait, to send the email next week so you could all have a nice holiday, but I didn't. Why not? He asked, looking up. Because I was tired of being the villain, I said, the words a raw confession. I was tired of missing family events, of watching from the outside while everyone else got to be together. I was tired of being treated like I'd done something wrong when all I did was tell the truth. Dad nodded slowly. That's fair. That's more than fair. And maybe part of me wanted everyone to know. I continued, a surprising admission. Wanted Miranda to be exposed. Wanted you all to realize you'd chosen the wrong daughter to believe. Also fair, he conceded, a faint smile playing on his lips. Does that make me vindictive? I asked, a flicker of vulnerability. It makes you human, Vivian, Dad said, his voice gentle. You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to want justice. You've earned that, right? He stood up and crossed to where I sat, pulling me into a hug. I let myself lean into it, surprised by how much I'd missed this simple contact, the solid comfort of his embrace. We're going to make this right. He murmured into my hair. However long it takes, we will. I drove home around midnight, the streets empty and glistening with fresh snow. Garrett had texted 3 more times, each message more concerned than the last. I called him from the car, putting him on speaker as I navigated the quiet, familiar roads. Are you okay? He asked immediately, his voice filled with worry. I was about to start calling hospitals. I'm fine, I said, a small, tired smile on my face. It's been a strange night. Strange how? I gave him the abbreviated version, a whirlwind of betrayal, confrontation, and crumbling facades. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I appreciated most about him. So, he summarized, his voice thoughtful, when I finished. Your sister's probably going to be charged with a felony, and your family just realized they've been treating you like garbage for 3 years based on lies. That about covers it. That about covers it. I agreed. How do you feel? That was the question, wasn't it? How did I feel? Vindicated. I said finally, the word tasting both sweet and bitter on my tongue. And sad. And angry that it took this long. And guilty for feeling vindicated when my sister's life is probably about to fall apart. You're allowed to feel all of those things, Garrett said gently. They're not mutually exclusive. She stole from our dying grandmother, Garrett. She looked me in the eye and called me crazy for pointing it out. She turned my entire family against me. I know. And part of me wishes I'd never found those bank statements. Wishes I'd just let it go. Let her get away with it, because at least then I'd still have my family. But you wouldn't. Not really, he said, his voice firm but kind. You'd have the illusion of family, while they all believed lies about you. He was right, of course. But it didn't make it any easier. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a blur of phone calls and awkward conversations. Dad called every day, sometimes twice, trying to cram 3 years of missed connection into daily updates and hesitant apologies. Mom called less frequently, her voice always thick with tears and regret, a raw vulnerability I hadn't heard in years. Aunt Sylvia, surprisingly, sent care packages filled with homemade cookies and handwritten notes, each one a desperate plea for forgiveness. Apologizing for every missed birthday, every holiday invitation I'd been excluded from. Uncle Preston, to my utter astonishment, showed up at my apartment on December 28th, unannounced. I almost didn't answer the door when I saw his familiar, somewhat imposing frame through the peephole. I know you probably don't want to see me, he said when I finally opened it, his hands stuffed awkwardly in his pockets. But I needed to say this in person. I stepped aside, letting him into my small apartment. It was a 1-bedroom in an older building, a place I'd moved into after quitting Harrison Enterprises, filled with mismatched furniture, second-hand finds, and inherited pieces from friends who were upgrading. It was a far cry from Miranda's sprawling colonial with its newly renovated kitchen. Preston sat on my threadbare couch, his gaze sweeping around, and I watched him register the stark difference between my life and the one his niece had been living on stolen money. I voted to exclude you, he said bluntly, his eyes meeting mine. When Miranda called that family meeting 3 years ago, when she laid out all her concerns about your behavior and your accusations against her, I was the one who suggested we create some distance until you got help. I thought we were protecting the family from drama. I sat down in the armchair across from him, my arms crossed, and waited. I'm an architect, he continued, his voice softer now. I make my living being detail-oriented, noticing things that don't add up, and I didn't notice. Or maybe I did notice and chose not to see. Miranda's new car, the kitchen renovation, the private school tuition on a household income that shouldn't have supported it. I knew Quentin's consulting business was struggling. I knew they'd been worried about money. But it was easier to believe I was the problem. I interjected, the bitterness unbidden. Yes, he met my eyes, a shadow of pain in his own. It was easier. Miranda has always been persuasive. Even when we were kids, and she was just my niece, she could talk her way into or out of anything. She'd tell these elaborate stories, and you'd believe them because she believed them. I think that's what happened with Dorothy's money. She convinced herself she was helping, that she'd pay it back, that it wasn't really stealing because they were family. That's not how the law sees it. No, it isn't. He agreed. rubbing his face tiredly. My sister is beside herself. Claudia keeps saying she failed as a mother, that she should have seen this coming. Raymond is drinking more than I've ever seen him drink. And Edith? He shook his head, a deep sigh escaping him. Mom is 92 years old. This kind of stress could kill her. A sharp flash of anger cut through my numbness. Are you here to ask me to drop the investigation? Because it's out of my hands now. The DA is involved. The estate attorney is involved. And even if I wanted to... No, Preston interrupted firmly, his gaze steady. God, no. I'm not asking you to do anything except accept my apology. What Miranda did was inexcusable, and what we did to you in response was almost as bad. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and set it on the coffee table between us. That's a check for $15,000. It's not enough. It could never be enough, but it's what I can afford right now. Consider it back payment for every birthday, every Christmas, every Thanksgiving you missed because we shut you out. I stared at the envelope, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. I didn't touch it. I don't want your money, Preston. Take it anyway, he urged, his voice soft. Use it for therapy, for a vacation, for whatever you need. You spent nearly 3 years being punished for telling the truth. Let me try to make a tiny dent in that debt. After he left, I opened the envelope. The check was made out for exactly $15,000. I folded it back up and put it in my desk drawer, unsure what to do with it. Blood money my grandmother used to call payments made to ease guilt. But then again, Grandma Dorothy was dead, and her blood money was what had started this whole mess. New Year's Eve came. Garrett wanted to go to a party his coworker was throwing, but I couldn't face a room full of strangers pretending to be excited about fresh starts and new beginnings. We compromised on dinner at a quiet Italian restaurant and champagne on my couch at midnight. Tell me about your family before all this happened, he said as we waited for our entrées, his voice a gentle invitation to a painful past. What were they like when things were good? I thought back to childhood, to summers at the lake house Grandma Dorothy used to rent, to Christmases that felt magical instead of weaponized. Miranda and I were close once, I said, surprising myself with the admission. Before the competition started, before everything became a comparison, we used to put on plays for the family, elaborate productions with costumes we'd make from Mom's old clothes. Miranda was always the star, and I was always the supporting character, but I didn't mind. She was good, really good. She could make you believe anything when she performed. What changed? He asked. High school, maybe. I got into the advanced placement classes and she didn't. I made the varsity soccer team as a sophomore and she'd been cut from JV. Little things that accumulated into this wedge between us. By college, we barely spoke unless we had to. The waiter brought our food and I pushed pasta around on my plate, not really hungry. After college, we had this unspoken truce. We'd be civil at family events, exchange birthday texts, pretend everything was fine. And then Grandma Dorothy started declining, and suddenly Miranda was the devoted granddaughter, visiting constantly, helping with finances, becoming the golden child in our grandmother's final years. While you were what? Garrett prompted gently. Working 60-hour weeks at Harrison Enterprises, trying to prove myself after the harassment complaint, trying to maintain some kind of normal life. I set down my fork. I visited Grandma when I could, which wasn't as often as I should have. So when Miranda painted me as the jealous sister who was barely involved, there was a grain of truth in it, just enough to make the lie believable. Garrett reached across the table and took my hand. You know none of this is your fault, right? Intellectually, yes. Emotionally, I shrugged. I'm working on it. The legal battle was just beginning, and what I thought was an open and shut case quickly revealed layers of manipulation and denial that shook me to my core. Kenneth Lawson called me on January 3rd. The DA wants to move forward with prosecution, he said, his tone professional. They're offering your sister a plea deal, plead guilty to 2 counts of elder financial abuse, make full restitution, and serve 12 months with the possibility of parole. If she doesn't take it, they'll go to trial with all 6 charges. What are you asking me? I asked, my voice tight. I'm not asking you anything, he clarified. I'm informing you as a courtesy since you're the one who brought this to light. The DA wants to know if you're willing to testify if it goes to trial. I thought about facing Miranda in a courtroom, about having our entire family drama aired publicly, about the media attention that would inevitably follow. Yes, I said, the word coming out with a surprising certainty. If it comes to that, I'll testify. Miranda didn't take the plea deal. Her attorney, an expensive shark named Philip Cordoza, whom Quentin's family had hired, advised her that they could win a trial. The strategy, I learned later, was to argue that Grandma Dorothy had been mentally incompetent and that Miranda had been managing her finances as an informal conservator. They planned to bring in medical experts who would testify about dementia and confusion, painting Miranda as a well-meaning family member who had been trying to protect an elderly woman from herself. The problem with that strategy was Grandma Dorothy's doctor, Dr. Margaret Sheffield, had been treating her for 30 years and had detailed notes from every single appointment. While Grandma had experienced some age-related memory issues, she'd been mentally competent until the final month of her life. Dr. Sheffield was prepared to testify to that effect. February brought Miranda's arrest. I found out from a text message in a family group chat that I'd been added to sometime in January. The message was from Mom. Miranda was arrested this morning. She's being arraigned this afternoon. Please pray for our family. I didn't pray. I went to work at the bookstore where I'd been employed since quitting Harrison Enterprises, shelving books and helping customers find the perfect mystery novel or romance or self-help book. My coworker, a 60-year-old woman named Joan, who had become something of a confidant, noticed my distraction. Family stuff. She asked during our lunch break, her eyes kind. My sister was arrested for stealing from our grandmother? Joan didn't flinch. The same sister who turned everyone against you. I told her bits and pieces over the months we'd worked together. That's the one. Everyone kept asking me that, as if my feelings were a simple thing that could be articulated in a few words. Like I'm watching a car crash in slow motion. I said finally, the truth of it hitting me, like I want to look away, but I can't. That's fair. Joan said, her voice soft. She made her choices. Now she gets to live with the consequences. But consequences rippled outward, didn't they? Miranda's kids, my nephew and niece, who I barely knew anymore, would grow up with a mother who'd been to prison. Quentin would have to explain to them why Mommy had to go away. Mom and Dad would spend years trying to reconcile the daughter they'd raised with the woman who'd committed felony theft. And I would have to live with being the person who set it all in motion, who refused to let it go, who chose justice over peace. The next few months were brutal. The investigation into Miranda's theft expanded as Kenneth Lawson's forensic accountant dug deeper into Grandma Dorothy's finances. What had started as $63,000 turned out to be closer to $85,000 once they uncovered additional credit card charges and transfers Miranda had carefully hidden across multiple accounts. The district attorney decided to prosecute. Miranda was arrested in February, her mugshot appearing in the local paper under a headline about elder abuse. Quentin filed for divorce 3 weeks later, citing irreconcilable differences. Miranda moved into a studio apartment across town and got a job waitressing because no one would hire her for accounting work anymore. The family fractured further. Mom sided with Miranda despite the overwhelming evidence, unable to accept that her eldest daughter was a criminal. She and Dad fought constantly, their arguments echoing through frantic phone calls and tense Sunday dinners. Uncle Preston stopped coming to family events altogether. Aunt Sylvia tried to maintain peace but ended up exhausted and resentful. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I mostly felt hollowed out, as if a vital part of me had been scooped clean. The trial, a public airing of our private shame, would become the ultimate test of where true loyalties lay, forcing everyone to finally pick a side. The trial happened in May. I had to testify, walking through the evidence I'd collected piece by agonizing piece, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Miranda's attorney tried to paint me as vindictive, as someone with a grudge who'd manufactured a case against her own sister. But the bank records didn't lie, and neither did the testimony from the bank manager, who confirmed that Miranda had been the only one making withdrawals from Grandma Dorothy's accounts in those final months. The jury deliberated for 6 grueling hours. Miranda was convicted on 3 counts of elder financial abuse and 2 counts of fraud. The judge sentenced her to 18 months in prison with a possibility of parole after 12 months, plus restitution of the full amount stolen. I wasn't in the courtroom when the sentence was read. I'd done my part, and I simply couldn't stomach watching my sister be led away in handcuffs, the final, undeniable proof of her downfall. Grandma Dorothy's estate was finally distributed in August, almost 3 years after her death. After legal fees and restitution to cover what Miranda had stolen, the estate was divided as Grandma had originally intended, equally among her 4 children and 6 grandchildren. Each grandchild received about $38,000. I put mine in a high-yield savings account and tried not to think about what it had cost to get it. Garrett and I broke up in September. It wasn't dramatic or angry. We just both realized that I'd never fully let him in, that some part of me was still locked in that moment on the porch when my sister closed the door in my face. He deserved someone who could give him more than the fragments I had left to offer. In October, almost a year after that fateful Christmas dinner, Dad called me. "Your mother wants to talk to you," he said without preamble, his voice carefully neutral. "She's finally ready to admit she was wrong." "What changed?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. "Miranda called her from prison," he said, a sigh escaping him. "She was angry, blamed your mother for not doing more to help her legal defense, said some things that..." He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. Let's just say Mom finally saw what she'd been refusing to see. We met at a diner, neutral ground. Mom looked older than I remembered, her hair more gray than blonde now, the lines around her eyes etched deeper than they'd been. "I'm sorry," she said before I'd even fully sat down, her voice raw. "I'm sorry for not believing you, for choosing Miranda, for losing nearly 3 years with you. I'm sorry for all of it. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to make her hurt the way she'd hurt me." But looking at her across the Formica table, at the wariness in her eyes, I just felt tired. "Okay," I said, the word feeling utterly inadequate. "Just okay." "What do you want me to say, Mom? That it's fine? It's not fine? You chose to believe I was having a mental breakdown rather than accept that Miranda could be a thief. You shut me out of family events for nearly 3 years. You missed my 30th birthday, Thanksgiving, every Christmas. I tried to tell you the truth, and you called me a liar." She flinched, a visible recoil, but she didn't look away. "You're right about all of it." "I needed you," I said, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "I needed my mother, and you weren't there. I know." Tears were streaming down her face now, silent rivers of regret. "I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." We sat there for a long time, neither of us touching the coffee and pie we'd ordered. Eventually, she reached across the table and took my hand. I didn't pull away. "Can we start over?" she asked, her voice a desperate plea. "Not forget what happened, but try to build something new." "Maybe," I said honestly, the word heavy with uncertainty. "But it'll take time. A lot of time." "I understand," she whispered. "It's been 4 months since that conversation. We're trying, Mom and I. She calls once a week. Sometimes I answer, sometimes I don't. She invited me to Thanksgiving, but I haven't decided yet if I'll go. Dad and I are in a better place. We meet for breakfast every other Saturday, and he's stopped making excuses for anyone. Miranda is scheduled for parole review in 3 months. If approved, she'll be released after serving 14 months total. I haven't decided yet if I'll write a statement supporting or opposing her release. Part of me hopes she's learned something, grown somehow from the consequences of her actions. Part of me knows people rarely change that fundamentally. What I do know is this: I told the truth when no one wanted to hear it. I stood alone when it would have been easier to stay silent. I lost my family for nearly 3 years, enduring their rejection and the agonizing question of my own sanity. And when they finally saw the truth, it was because I refused to let lies win. Standing on that porch last Christmas, watching through the window as everyone laughed without me, I'd felt like the loneliest person in the world. But I wasn't wrong. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the problem. Sometimes doing the right thing costs everything. Sometimes justice feels less like victory and more like survival. Sometimes you win the battle but lose pieces of yourself in the process. But I'd do it again. Even knowing the cost, even understanding what it would take from me, I'd do it again because Grandma Dorothy deserved better than to be stolen from while she was dying. Because the truth matters, even when it's painful. Because silence in the face of wrongdoing is its own kind of crime. That's what I tell myself anyway. On the hard days, when I wonder if it was worth it, the answer is always the same. How much would you be willing to sacrifice for the truth, even if it meant shattering the illusion of family peace?